please type in your name, your affiliation, location, how long you've been in your position, and along with the answer to our icebreaker question, what is your favorite team memory? So without further ado, let's move on to our agenda. Wow, this it's not advancing my slides here today. So let's do this. That is really weird. Let's move on to this. Here we go. And do the share again. Yeah, it's very strange. Okay, let's make that bigger. There we go. So again, today's agenda discusses and cuts to prevention aid funding. We're excited to have a really terrific lineup of speakers. If we feel that we have a lot today, I know Rafa and I get really excited about these workshops, but this might be the one I'm most excited about. So again, thanks to all of our speakers and sharing your time and expertise with us. So we'll begin. I'll provide an overview of AIS prevention in Minnesota. We'll then have a presentation by Nick on recent Maser prevention research. We'll take a short break. We'll then hear from Steve Henry, who's done an analysis on curbing the spread. We'll talk about the county aid survey that just went out today from Drew Dickert, and then we'll have a panel discussion and basically have a recap of what we heard and some reactions from our panelists, and then also field some questions from all of you on what you've heard today. So are we all set, Rafa?
Yep, we are good to go.
Okay, let me get out of this and then I'll bring up my first presentation. If I can get my mouse to work. Boy, technology is really funny today. Good grief. There we go. I got that. No. Oh no, it didn't go. Try that again. Sorry about this, folks. Technology is being a challenge today. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. So how's everything looking, Rafa?
I can see it looks good. I can hear you well.
All right, great. Thank you. So I'm going to kick off this workshop. I'm very excited to help share the success story along with our other speakers. So over the past 30 years, we've learned, what we've learned is that aquatic invasive species management is all about people management, and public awareness and proactive behaviors are keys to preventing the spread of AIS. And as many of you know or have heard, you can ask any state which leads AIS outreach and assessment. Minnesota is recognized as a leader in research, education, outreach, and assessment for over 3 decades. And through these assessments, we've learned a great deal about how to tailor and improve our AIS outreach aimed at prevention. And it's my intent through this presentation to inspire all of you to continue to provide evidence that prevention is possible and it is working. So for the purposes of this presentation, we'll talk about what has and is being done. We'll demonstrate effective aquatic invasive species outreach that can change behaviors, show evidence of success AIS management that's curbing the spread in Minnesota based on 4 recent studies, and then we'll have some questions and answers with our panelists. So what is being done for AIS prevention in Minnesota? Well, research shows that people pose the greatest risk for threats for overland transport. We know that people will take action if they know what to do, and we know for sure that without proper information that they will likely do nothing and that the spread is inevitable. So it helps set the stage. A national committee of the Federal Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force was convened, which I was an active member of, and to design a national campaign, which was launched in 2002. Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers, just a few things about it. It's a national social marketing-based campaign. It's designed to link tools to barriers for behavior change. It's created to be stepped down by any partner at any level that can be adapted or adopted using resource materials. Over 1,400 partners have joined, including businesses, agencies, academia, and nonprofits. And since 2006, campaign partners have generated over 2 billion impressions. We then used the Stop Aquatic Hitchhiker campaign to launch the first comprehensive AIS campaign in the Great Lakes. But before we get into that, let's for a few minutes pause to discuss what led up to the development and launch of the national campaign. Previous multi-state surveys of boaters and anglers that I led in 1994, 2000, 2005, 2007 included Minnesota boaters and anglers. The first two surveys were mail surveys in 1994 and 2000, and the 2006-2007 surveys were face-to-face surveys at water accesses. So with this, we have long-term longitudinal data for boaters and anglers for over a decade for Minnesota, and I'll show some of the results of those research projects in a few minutes. Now that I sort of set the stage, back in 2010, I led on behalf of the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network the first comprehensive Great Lakes AIS campaign. And as part of that effort, I led the first regional survey of North American Fishing Club members. It was conducted in 2012 in collaboration with the North American Media Group and Wildlife Forever. So for clarity, we have a total of 4 multi-state surveys that included Minnesota boaters and anglers. So our objectives for the project and the survey were pretty straightforward. Can strategic messaging using dedicated e-marketing can it effectively reach anglers, and can it raise angler awareness and also can result in correlative reported behavior change? So how we did this is that after we exposed recipients to 4 e-newsletters that were delivered via email, with prevention message showing the who, the what, the where's, the whys, the whys, and the hows to prevent AIS spread, we administered that e-survey. One of the key questions was, what is the importance for taking action to preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species at water accesses? Results from all the states were very similar, remarkably so from New York to Minnesota, and at 97% when combined, very important to moderately important. To determine awareness, we asked a before and after question, and it was, what was your awareness before exposure to the messages, and what was it after? And it rose from 46 to 96%, which is a 50% increase. We then asked the $1,000,000 question: what actions will you take, and what actions will you take in the future? Always to usually taking action rose from 64 to 97%, which was a 33% increase. Button's not working. Moving on to the results of another survey that I helped with in 2013, the White Iron Chain of Lakes Association, which is located just north of Duluth and south of Ely, led a 30-month watershed outreach effort and conducted a mail survey of residents on AIS towards the end of the outreach effort. By design, their survey was designed so that we had comparable data at 2 watershed scales. So one at the Waikola scale, and one also at the Great Lakes scale using the Great Lakes Angler Survey that I just discussed. So now let's compare some of the results. So a little bit about the table here. Here we ranked over on the left-hand side from very high to low. The actions that people were taking. There's the actions that were identified in the surveys, and the results with the Akwesasne Watershed Protection Project or the Waikola Survey on the left, and the results of the Great Lakes Angler Survey on the right. You can see that they're remarkably similar. People are responding to the message. Over 90% were said that they were draining their water. There's over 90% were inspecting and removing. We could do a little bit better on the unwanted bait disposal. Some around 15% or so are still releasing unwanted bait in improper ways. And drying everything is pretty consistent across the 2 scales. But rinsing and washing, the difference there is likely because south of Ely, there's not a lot of infrastructure for people to rinse off and wash their boats compared to at a Great Lakes scale where there's much greater opportunities. Yet another and 5th survey also showed an increase in awareness. Also, as part of the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network campaign, myself and my Sea Grant colleagues conducted post-event evaluations of events to measure changes in awareness and behaviors. And based on outreach conducted in person at 11 events, post-event surveys showed when combining very aware, and moderately aware, overall awareness went from 68% before the events to 82% post events, which is a 26% increase, which was statistically significant. So to recap where we're at in this story, we now have more evidence besides mail, face-to-face surveys, online. We also have direct post-event surveys that support extension-based outreach via meetings and presentations can have a positive change in voter and angler awareness and also behaviors. So for behaviors when combining always to very often, overall actions increased from 53% taking action to 92%, always to very often taking action in the future, which is a 39%, which was also statistically significant. And based on the years of data and the various types of data instruments used, I'm convinced that boaters and anglers will take appropriate action to prevent the spread if they're given the proper information. Our challenge is to keep the messages in front, very actionable, keep them in front of them, and refresh those messages to keep them consistent. So now let's step away for a second from the survey results and take a look from broader context to visit some of the whys and hows we've been observing these results and trends. First is leadership. Excuse me. Nationally, Minnesota led the first comprehensive program in the early 90s with a focus on policy, public outreach, watercraft inspection, and more recently, decontamination, enforcement, early detection, and risk assessment. Minnesota outreach shifted very early to more engagement and being more strategic in our messaging and consistent in using simple messaging. And today we're the only state in the nation that provides local AIS prevention aid funding that creates a statewide network for local AIS prevention programs. 83 out of the 87 counties qualify at 10 million and receiving $10 million annually. So turning back to the outreach and evaluation. So this is a graph that represents a summary of the outcomes of all the surveys that I've discussed so far today. Looking back at the trend in the data that I've collected and compared shows that for Minnesota boaters and anglers, not only are we observing a high degree of awareness on AIS prevention, we're also observing a consistent increase by 97% in reported behavior change, an increase of 27% since 1994. And thinking about this in the context of a broader society, can you think of any other behavior change program with these results? I'm thinking conservation, seatbelts, littering, recycling, energy conservation, water, and residential water use. None of those compare, not even in Minnesota, which is one of the most environmental and conservation-oriented states in the nation. So our number one challenge is to stop aquatic hitchhikers, clean, dry prevention messages relevant here in Minnesota and beyond. So number three is because we have the data and the research. So at the intersection of resources and risk, Minnesota should have been a perfect storm for the spread of aquatic invasive species, but it hasn't happened. Prevention is working despite the risks that we have 822,000 registered boaters. We rank third in the nation behind California and Florida. Michigan and Wisconsin is just behind us. We have 1.4 million licensed anglers. We have 33 million tourists, and 36 of them come here to fish. We have 11,842 lakes and 8,100 fishable rivers, and we have a whopping 2,245 public accesses and thousands of private access. So really, we should have been the perfect storm for the spread of aquatic invasive species. But the compelling prevention outcomes is that nationally Minnesota is the first and only state that can claim that we're curbing the spread. Since 2015, boater awareness and behaviors are very high. Reported compliance and actual compliance are all over 95%, highest nationally. And again, some of the counties are reporting 98 to 99% compliance. And since 2025, data does indicate that people are following prevention AIS laws. And analysis that we'll hear about in just a few minutes by the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center and Cass County program indicate the rate of spread has slowed in Minnesota over the last decade, and we are the only state that can claim that as well. So all of this, as I've mentioned in my opening comments, you've heard me say this at UMIS conferences, successes in AIS prevention has been based on the effective statewide and local partnerships by the DNR, counties, MASERC, federal agencies, tribes, lake associations, advocacy groups, and people who enjoy Minnesota water resources. Clearly, Minnesotans truly love our lakes. So in conclusion, AIS prevention is possible. Three elements that have contributed to prevention successes include leadership, outreach, and evaluation, and data and research. Since 2015, DNR watercraft inspectors have observed 95% statewide compliance at water access. Many county inspection programs are observing 98 to 99% compliance. And the proof is in the pudding because only 9% of Minnesota water bodies are listed as infested with aquatic invasive species, which has only slightly changed over the last decade. A very high proportion of Minnesota and boaters and anglers, over 95%, are motivated to take actions to prevent the spread. And have you seen, based on these studies, that over the past 10 years, the rate of AIS spread has dramatically slowed. Statewide and local collaborations and partnerships are key. And last, local prevention aid funding is a wise investment to protect our lakes and rivers and communities that depend upon healthy waters for recreation economies and for jobs. So with that, I just want to remind you that we have an Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference that's coming up October 6th through the 8th in La Crosse, Wisconsin. The call for abstracts is open to April 15th, and registration will be open in mid-May. So, and the theme for our conference is celebrating our 10th conference with science, partnership, and successes. So with that, do we have time for questions, Rafa?
We do. We have you until 1:35, so you have about 9 minutes.
Any questions in the chat?
We do not have any questions yet.
Wow, we're up to 87 people. You folks rock.
Okay.
Thanks, Tina, for putting that in the chat. Appreciate that.
Yeah. If we don't have any questions, I see that Nick's on.
Yep. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I think we might have lost Doug. Well, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Rafa.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll continue with the program because I think we lost Doug there for a little bit. So Nick, will you be ready to start your presentation? I know we're a little bit early.
Yeah, I can start. If I can share my screen, his screen's still shared, so not sure if I can override him or not.
Oh, I think, yeah, he has been overridden.
All right, you can see mine now?
Yeah.
Okay. Want me to jump into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for coming in.
Yep, thanks for the invite. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Phelps. I've been the director of the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center since 2016. If you're not familiar with our group, we're based here at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul, but we have projects on many of our state's invasive species, aquatic invasive species throughout Minnesota and beyond. I'm going to highlight today some of our work focusing on AIS prevention, primarily focused on the impacts to the spread, the rate of spread over time.
I took my headphones off for a second.
Okay, if I can. All right, so hopefully I save time for questions. So folks, think of some, please, so we don't have the silence at the end or drop them in the chat as we go along. Just to summarize a few of the main inflection points in our recent history as it relates to AIS. Fortunately, my list matches up very well to what Doug described in his presentation. And you can see here in the 1980s, zebra mussels and Eurasian water milfoil showed up in Minnesota. There was a few other high-profile invasive species that really got the state's attention. The lake managers realized that something needed to happen. The legislature committed to funding a new program at the Minnesota DNR. In 1992, their invasive species unit was established. A decade later, the ANS Task Force, a national program developed and implemented with state partners, Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers. And as Doug described, that was really a shift in sort of the public perceptions and awareness of this as an issue. Lake managers and sort of natural resource professionals understood this long before then, but it was really the public engagement in the early 2000s that sort of started to shift the narrative. And I think you'll see some of that in the data and their participation in prevention. A decade after that, in 2012, the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, or MACIRC, was established. That was really in response to sort of folks, management agencies doing the best they could with the resources and the information they had. But the state decided that we needed to innovate and develop new tools and strategies, and this included prevention. How do we more efficiently optimize our limited resources to slow down the spread while we develop the control tools to suppress or eradicate populations? Then in 2014, as many of you are aware, the AIS Prevention Aid program was first established. That first year it rolled out slowly, and it wasn't until the year after, 2015, when the full $10 million went into effect, distributed directly to counties to help support their local prevention activities. Now, as we sort of reflect back on that timeline, there was millions and millions of dollars being increasingly allocated to address this problem. The number of lakes that were invaded was growing, the public concern was growing, the legislative urgency was growing, and so too was our response. And this all made sense to a lot of people. But this last year, in 25, was sort of the first, this is the first inflection point in our history where we saw a pushback to this pattern, where there was a proposed cut, and a major cut, to the AIS Prevention Aid program. Well, these other sources, these other things had their fair share of ups and downs. There hadn't been anything like this cut that was proposed last year. And it came as a surprise to a lot of people, including me, having recognized the bipartisan support that invasive species issues benefited from over the years. This was definitely a change. And I've got a bit of a timeline here just to give you a sense of how fast this emerged and how quickly these things can happen. I think it reinforces a need for ongoing commitment to sustain these programs. Otherwise, things will happen fast. In January of 25, just over a year ago, this was the first, I'd heard rumors just weeks before this email came out from Minnesota Lakes and Rivers advocates, but this is the first sort of public communication that I saw that the funding was proposed to be cut in half. This was proposed as part of the governor's budget. A couple weeks later, it was on the agenda of the state's AIS Advisory Committee. This is an advisory group to the DNR, and they had a brief discussion on this topic, but it hadn't been really discussed in a way outside of that group up until then. Me and many others were trying to get our heads around what was actually being proposed, understand the political legs that it might have to be implemented. People were at the Capitol testifying and advocating in March and into April. In early April, it really picked up in the media, and many of you were commenting at your local county board meetings or other places, your task force, to explain what the impact might be should this funding go away at the local level. We rallied here on campus to try to understand the data and try to measure in a quantitative way what the impacts might be should this funding go away, and I'll present those data here in just a little bit. The session ended once and then again, ultimately with a cut in place. So in in a matter of about 4 or 5 months, we went from having the $10 million intact to having it cut in half. And it played out very quickly, in my opinion, considering the significance of the impact here. So it leaves us with a lot of questions, and I think we're going to talk about that throughout this afternoon. What does this mean ultimately, especially at the local level where this money was being directed? What does this mean for prevention, and what does this mean for future spread and risk in the landscape? I want to set a, and I'll get into the data, very data-oriented, data-driven, but there's a few sort of higher level things that I want to get out there. First is that I've got a fair bit of concern about the prevention aid funding being cut, not just because of the risk of future spread, but the benefit that that funding has provided at the local level. The local AIS managers have been essential in the way we do our research here on campus. The projects that we support and prioritize have been informed by, in many cases, by local managers. And it's through local managers, oftentimes, that gets our research out there and into action. We can come up with all sorts of great ideas on campus, but if there's not an infrastructure to implement it, it doesn't do a lot of good. So that's really important. I also think the value of a trusted local resource is really important and cannot be overstated. And over the last year or so, we've been hearing more and more stories of people who were in some ways born out of this prevention aid funding, got their professional starts in invasive species because of this money and have gone on to have careers out of it and make a difference. Just a personal anecdote, I was back in undergrad, I was a watercraft inspector for the DNR. And that was my first exposure to aquatic invasive species as an issue and something that, we could do something about. So it was that prevention lens from my very beginning in invasive species that ultimately led me into a career in academia and now as the director of the research center. Long story short, I see a lot of benefits to this program in addition to the direct prevention response that we'll talk about now. The way I'm going to frame this presentation is around frequently asked questions that I've heard over the last year or so, really from a pessimistic perspective. The people who are trying to put some shade on AIS prevention as a hopeless cause or an inevitable end, sort of the negative folks in the room. I frame them in this way, in one, to orient myself and how research is directly addressing those concerns, but also I suspect that some of these questions will resonate with you. And if you need some data-driven evidence to respond to them, feel free to use these talking points. The first question I get, and these will get increasingly more directed and complicated. The first one's quite simple, and that's the fact that AIS have already infested all the lakes. There's nothing left to protect. What's the point, ultimately? And this, and some of these come directly from legislators or sort of VIPs in the landscape that could be pretty influential. And it doesn't matter how we slice or dice the data on this one. We all know, it is very intuitive, that there are many, many lakes that are still uninvaded and at risk. And we can toggle all the different variables and assumptions we might build into these models, like whether or not we know where all the current infestations are, the percentage of lakes that might be suitable for a particular invasive species. It doesn't matter. There are tens of percentages of, in some case, 90% of lakes are still suitable, still at risk of future invasions. And that's a huge number when you consider the aquatic resource value that we as Minnesotans place on our lakes, rivers, and wetlands. So this is a simple point to be direct. There are many lakes, many uninvaded lakes that are at risk and worthy of preventing spread. The next question is sort of framed around like, what would we even do? And we heard Doug talk about the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers program and other programs like it, trying to get the public response. But like, there's lots of stuff out there. Like, what does it mean? Like, what could we possibly do at local or statewide levels, or even at individual access? So we've spent a lot of time in this space trying to understand the whole suite of prevention and intervention strategies, to quantify them, to really deeply understand the pros and the cons, the costs, the efficiencies, all of that. This is one example of many that we have here at MACERC, where sort of foundational understanding of spiny water flea spread can directly lead to prevention activities. We have a whole advocacy campaign that's on our website, prepackaged outreach material that people can deploy on how to best prevent species like spiny water fleas. We've also launched through our AIS detectors program in partnership with Extension, the spiny water flea surveillance and monitoring, where lake associations or other interested members of the public can go out there and do spiny water flea monitoring on their own. And that, of course, informs future prevention activities if we can find these populations early. So just an example of how we can move sort of foundational research, what sounds like a sort of an abstract research project, into real world action, and inform what can be done across the state. Hopefully many of you have heard about the AIS Explorer. It's an online and interactive tool. The website's there at the bottom of the screen. We've got several features to this dashboard now. The first one here is where to look if you're planning surveillance activities. Obviously, if you're going to think about prevention, you need to know where things are. And this is a interactive tool that gives you the likelihood of infestations into the future for all lakes in the state. We also have a version of this that leverages the boater connectivity networks to optimize locations for watercraft inspection programs. A lot to unpack here in this slide and the last one, but just that examples of how we can do prevention. To me, this FAQ really isn't a question anymore. We know what to do. It's just a matter of implementing it. But I do think there's still room for innovation here on the prevention front. And this is just an example of a project we have going on right now, where we've deployed trail cams at boat ramps. You can see all the dots on the map there, where we're monitoring boat activity 24/7 over the course of a field season to get more dynamic sort of boat movement information, the types of boats, how many people are going in and out. We can't see their behaviors necessarily at the boat ramp, but the timing is really important as we think about watercraft inspection programs. We put the watercraft inspector there where it's convenient for the inspector, but that's not necessarily when the boaters are most active. And thinking about how to align those objectives can be really important. And it's not the same for every single lake we're finding. We'll have a lot more to present on this topic at the showcase coming up in October. And at UMISC, I'm sure. So shifting gears a little bit into this next FAQ that we get, and that's about effectiveness. So let's say we know what to do, but how effective are those strategies? We're spending a lot of money and we're making a lot of assumptions that these things we do are going to be effective. There's a big difference between self-reported behavior and sort of a sign at the boat ramp or many other things we could measure or implement, and what risk is actually being reduced. And quantifying that is really important as we think into the next steps of cost effectiveness. So I'll show you a quick study here. We staged sort of infested boats. They had a variety of invasive species located on the boats in a consistent way and plausible locations. We went to boat ramps where inspectors and decon folks were already positioned. We talked to random boaters who happened to be at those places too. And we asked them to do what they would normally do under some scripted scenario. The point of these slides, and this is a whole thesis project summarized in this one slide, what I hope you take away though, is that there is measurable improvements in the effectiveness of intervention when we have inspectors and decon folks at the boat ramps. While an individual boater, when prompted, can remove about 56 or so % of the invasive species that are on the boat, there's about a 20 to 30% improvement with a trained professional. Now, when you think about the prevention aid dollars, the funding that goes to supporting watercraft inspections, this is sort of the return on that investment, at least in an effectiveness standpoint. It's measurable. And where those funds are being used to inform outreach and getting people to do these behaviors, that's measurable. There's definitely an effectiveness gained when we're prompting people and when we're supporting them with trained capacity at the boat ramp. So this is, in my opinion, these are effective strategies. Now, you can play around with these data or make up your own. This is a new feature that came out about a year ago in the AIS Explorer. Within this tool, you can, within your jurisdiction, pick your suite of lakes that you care about, or your county or your sort of tribal boundaries, whatever your area is. And you can use our data that are built on that last project I just talked about. The empirical data will pre-populate in this tool, or you can change it. If you want to change the effort of what percentage of boats are inspected or receive outreach, you can change the effectiveness of that intervention, and you can change the cost. All of that's built into this tool, and it will give you an output of the cost benefit of that intervention strategy, however you define it. So this, for the first time, sort of gives you a way to play around with this question of, if I deploy these things, how effective will it be? What is the risk reduction on the landscape? So this next question is taking it a step further. Like, hopefully you're convinced, or you know in your professional capacities, that prevention can work. We know at an individual watercraft inspector, they have an 80% risk reduction. We know on average, boaters, when prompted, are about 55% effective at reducing risk. Like, those are measurable things, but on the landscape, what does that mean? And what does the data show us at the landscape level over time that this has been beneficial? And so this is really where the conversation was back in February and March of last year. Like, as it relates to the prevention aid funding, people were asking me, prove it. Prove that it's been effective and that we should retain the program. So I get on the old MACERC bat phone here, and I called 3 super smart people to help dig into the data. I provided each one of them with the exact same data set pulled from the DNR's website of confirmed AIS infestations over the last 40 years. To be clear, it was just the confirmations, not the connected waters. And we included all invasive species, but allowed them to play around with the data as they saw fit. They each approached it in 3 different ways. Jake on the top, Dr. Walsh, he is a quantitative ecologist. He approached it one way from sort of a quantitative ecology perspective. On the bottom right of the screen, it's Dr. Alex Badges. He's a data scientist, a quant ecologist with MACERC. He took a very different approach with the same data set, very different and more of a modeling simulation strategy. And then Amy Kinsley, she's with the College of Veterinary Medicine here on campus, affiliated with MACERC for a while. She's an epidemiologist who took another very different approach to understanding the history of spread here in Minnesota. They knew the context in which we were asking these questions, but I did not prompt them in a way to elicit a response. I just told them to look at the data and see if there were changes in spread over time. And if we could, not directly through causation, but just correlation, look and see if the prevention aid funding, the timing of the prevention aid was involved with the pattern that we might see. So I'm going to break down the next few slides from each one of their approaches, like how they approached the data and what the results were. I'm not going to go into the details of it. We're working on the published paper, and I'm happy to send you resources if you want to get into the more of the statistics and the back-end modeling. But I'll just show you the summaries and the main takeaways. So first is just a very basic rate of spread over time. This is just the year-to-year rate change. And you can see what I have is what you're seeing on the screen now is for all the big map, or the big graph, if you can see my cursor. This is pre-prevention aid, and you can see the trend, the trajectory going positive over time. And as we break them down for individual species, there's a lot of variability year to year, and there's lots of reasons for that. But you can see an upward trend for pretty much everything. Now, as I reveal the post-prevention aid funding, you can see a dramatic decline for many, but not all, of the species. This is just, again, just a basic plot. So there's with inflection points. And you can see that there was a measurable change around that 2015 and 2018 time period. Now, if we look at the rate of change per year over time, to orient you to this figure, and I'll reveal more panels here in just a second, that horizontal line from 0, that means that the rate of change is staying stable, that it's changing at the same rate year to year. What we're looking for here is more statistical significance and deviations from that. It's one thing just to look at a pattern and a plot, but when you look at the significance of that pattern, this is what Jake was particularly interested in. And you can see for the first 15 years or so, it's quite stable. There was a pretty steady increase of spread. We went through a phase where there was a rapid increase. The rate of change was increasing every year from about 2003 or so until about 2015. Then we entered this phase of sort of stable rate of spread, and while the trended downward, it wasn't significantly different from 0. And it wasn't until the last few years when we see this, for the first time in our history in Minnesota, a significant decrease in the rate of spread, perhaps associated with the prevention aid funding finally catching up to itself. Now, Amy looked at this a different way. As an epidemiologist, recall our experiences during the COVID pandemic and thinking of R0, this sort of infectious reproductive number. And here it's that deviation from 1. One infectious individual to one infectious individual, that sort of constant rate of spread from 1 to 1 to 1. That's maintaining an infestation or an infection. If it goes above that, that means it's ramping up and each individual is spreading to at least more than 1. And if it goes below 1, the epidemic is shrinking. So for this first phase, we saw a rapid increase, perhaps associated with, this isn't because, well, I won't speculate now, but there was an increase. Things were spreading fast then, or were being found fast then. We dipped below this for a few years in the late 90s, and then we went through a fairly long period where there was steady, high rates of spread. It was above that sort of epidemic threshold where we were accelerating our infestations. Our epidemic was accelerating. What we wanted to do through the COVID-19 pandemic and what we've long hoped to see in the invasive species infestation rates is a drop below that. This is where, remember, bending the curve? We bent the curve, and this is that inflection point in the last few years. While it's been trending down since like 2017 or so, it wasn't until the last few years where we saw that significantly dip below that R0 of 1. And that's a big deal. And as Doug alluded to, these last few figures, I haven't seen data, if anybody's even collecting it, for any other state that demonstrates this. I think it's a success story that we ought to be celebrating. So all three of them with three different approaches agreed that the rate of spread has slowed down, coincidentally or not, timed very well with the establishment of the prevention aid funding and all that good work that's been implemented throughout the state. Now, we can talk about bending the curve, and that feels good, but especially at the Capitol, they want to talk, and I imagine at many of your county board meetings, they want to know the return on the investment. They're spending $10 million a year. Over the last 10, it's $100 million. Like, what does that mean from an ROI, the return on investment? And this is perhaps the hardest thing that we've tried to do here at MACERC as it relates to prevention, is to prove that it worked. It's sort of the adage in prevention implementation that proving that prevention is effective is the hardest thing. It's harder than actually preventing something from happening. But we leaned into simulation models and some of the other research that's been done at MACERC to explore the data over the last several decades to try to answer this question. And I'll break it down for you because I think the slide after this one will be sort of the unveiling for the whole presentation. We can simulate the number of new infestations that are going to happen, and that's what you can see if you go on the AIS Explorer. That sort of assumes a status quo of what's going to happen into the future. It assumes that interventions that are currently happening are going to happen in the future, and you'll get some rate of spread. And we can estimate the number of new infestations that we'll see over time. So let's say in this hypothetical scenario here, that the number of new infestations, if we assume the status quo, would be 300. Now, we can use these models and go underneath the hood and dial up the risk. Increase the likelihood that a boat moving from Lake A to B is more likely to spread invasive species. And we can make the likelihood directly connected with the expected effectiveness of an intervention. So I'm trying to say is we can go in there and hypothetically remove the interventions and see what would happen over time. And in this case, let's say we remove the interventions, we would expect intuitively that the number of infestations would increase. And in this case, let's say it's 450. That's an increase of 150 infestations because we removed those interventions. Now, we went into our models and we calibrated them based on the efforts and activities that have been done with, as far as we understand them, with the data that's been collected in the past with the prevention aid funding. So we took out the prevention aid funding from our models to see what would happen. We did this for the two species that we've spent a lot of time modeling, and that's zebra mussels and starry stonewort. So first, again, the green shaded ones, that'll be the interventions retained. That's what we would have expected. The reality matches very well with the predicted model outcomes. The purple will be what we would have expected if there was no prevention aid money. We expect that there would be 75 more lakes infested with zebra mussels right now if we hadn't spent the money from the prevention aid program. So you can see here there's error bars within this, and these are the average in between, but that's our estimate. If you're asking for the ROI on the prevention aid program as it relates to zebra mussels, it's 75 lakes without infestations right now. For starry stonewort, that number is 16. These error bars overlap more and they have longer right tail. And that's because there's less data and more model uncertainty because we don't have the history like we do with zebra mussels from which to have learned and built these models. But nevertheless, there is a significant difference between the average number of infestations we saw with intervention and without intervention. We could do these should we have all the models for all the different species, and get sort of a total number of infestations averted based on the prevention aid. But I think these two in particular are species that resonate well with decision makers and should get people's attention. Now, the last question is, let's say we convince everybody that the prevention aid program and everything else that we do in the state is really important, that it's cost effective and we bent the curve and it's the ROI is strong. We've got the capacity, everything's feeling good. I still have had people and have people who tell me that there's other priorities. And this is not a question that is an easy one to answer. This one gets much more subjective. It's a values-based question of AIS prevention versus the million other things that we could spend our limited dollars for. Not just natural resource issues, but many other social causes and programs. We've done a lot of work at MACERC looking at the public's values, attitudes, and perceptions of invasive species. We know that the public wants to invest in this space. We know that when you think about states in general, Minnesota cares more about the environment, willing to do more than pretty much anywhere. But nevertheless, we've got hard decisions. And it's important that research, the public, and managers come together to help tell this story about what have these programs accomplished, what have they meant from like a quantitative, nerdy data science way that I just presented, but also the stories at the local level of the kids that are getting engaged, the zebra mussel or milfoil that was found in a boat that didn't go into a lake. All of these stories are going to resonate and have to be told in ways that connect with people, especially the decision makers, to retain a program as important as the prevention aid program is. And I haven't been keeping track of my time, Rafa, but hopefully we got a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nick. That was an amazing presentation. We do have some time for questions. We have about 7. So if anybody has any questions for Nick, you're welcome to raise your hand, unmute yourself, or put it in the chat. And I believe there's one in the chat already. So the question is, was increased saturation, more popular lakes already contracting and invasive, considered when looking at the slowed rate of spread of analysis? Is the slowed rate of spread due to the fact that there are not as many popular lakes that are not already infested?
That's a great question, John. So yes, the short answer is yes. So the spread models are all built on our estimates of boater movement and boating activity. So popular lakes have a lot more, especially infested popular lakes, have a lot more at-risk boats coming out of them and spreading to other places. Less popular lakes, especially uninfested ones, have fewer boats coming in. And so those sort of the in and out of any given lake is factored in. And as we sort of saturate the popular lakes with infestations, they become sources for everything else. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm not answering your question clearly. Yes, we do account for that.
Okay, we have, oh, I heard someone.
Yeah, Doug, Nick, I'd just like to add on to your comment a caveat, and from a historical perspective. We were very concerned, of course, when zebra mussels were first found in Louis Harbor and the Mississippi River. And I was working with DNR in my previous capacity and talking with Gary Montz about, which lakes are going to be the most risky lakes in the state of Minnesota. And we sort of felt the same way as you did, and what we see now in the data is the more popular lakes became infested. But early on in the infestation, I mean, Lake Zumbro and Lake Osawatomie, we did not expect those two waters to be our first infestations. We expected waters like Lake of the Woods and Mille Lacs Lake to be some of our first lakes to become infested. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yep, if we've learned anything from invasive species, we should expect to be surprised. In some of these patterns of spread are no exception. There's a within our paper where we describe these border networks and the role of boat movement in the spread patterns. We highlight an example of a lake near Crosby. It's a mine pit that has no public access, but was infested with zebra mussels. And sort of thinking about these alternative pathways of spread or the low frequency, high risk activities, they're definitely happening. What we see though in when we look at patterns at the state level, and this gets borne out in the data, it doesn't matter how we look at it really. The boat movement, the trends the patterns we see for boat movement strongly predict the likelihood of infestations. While there's still going to be one-off surprises here and there that we may never be able to account for.
Sure. Yeah, and those abandoned mine pits are used by recreational divers, which is a whole nother pathway that we need to be cognizant of and to be able to address.
That's what we speculated in the paper was diving.
Yeah, we have, I think, 8 water bodies in the state of Minnesota due to recreational diving, or suspected anyway. Let's see. Cal has a question, and I see a hand up too. Cal says, are there other invasive species in the region that are not in Minnesota but threatening?
Oh, yeah. There's 10x species on our doorstep that we ought to be concerned about. Things like hydrilla. There's some crayfish species. Some of the invasive carp swimming up the Mississippi River. There's species that pop up here on occasion that don't establish well, but have demonstrated pathways for introduction. Yeah, there's a long list, Cal. And we should keep our eyes on the horizon as much as we do within the state.
Yeah, Cal, the Minnesota Invasive Species Advisory Council did a risk assessment of both aquatics and terrestrials, and if you wanted to see which species are of concern to Minnesota, you could take a look at the MISAC website. I'll put that in the chat. And Byron Carnes also mentioned golden mussel, very much on our radar screen here in Minnesota. I'm on the ANS Task Force Golden Mussel Work Group that's putting together a national plan. Was there another hand up earlier?
We do have a question in the chat that I think is important from Amanda. So Dr. Phelps, do you have ideas or plans for using this information to advocate with the Revenue Committee, legislature to resign the scheduled AIS reduction?
Really good question. And a complicated answer. The short answer is here at the university, our role as researchers is to inform conversations and understand sort of complicated things to make good decisions. We aren't, by the traditional term definition, we're not advocates. I'm not at the Capitol introducing legislation or lobbying for change, but I am both personally and also on behalf of MACERC, recognize the value of the AIS Prevention Aid program and will speak whenever asked about the value of reinstating it. It's important that these conversations are happening and that people are being brought to the table to inform the conversation. In all of our various roles here at the university or at the DNR or at the county level, we have different rules about how we can engage in these things. I think the door is open from a university perspective to inform, but not quote advocate. But I think you got my intent of what I've said today, and I'll say the exact same thing to anybody at the Capitol.
Thank you, Nick. We're right on time, but Doug, I think we should maybe get Jessamine in here. Just, I know we rarely have Nick's time, so I think it's okay we go a little bit late.
Yep.
Right, Jessamine.
Yeah, hi, Nick. I was just curious with the number of lakes that you suspect could be infested if it wasn't for the AIS Prevention Aid, if you have any modeling capability to predict which lakes. I think that would really, I mean, it would just be a hypothetical model, but there may be a way to do that, especially with the tool that you guys have to predict risk of lakes being infested. That might really hit home to some of our legislatures if they see the name of their lake on the list that potentially has been protected.
Yep, good question. What the models are really good at are predicting numbers, not which lake. When we look back as we validate these models, the overall numbers quite accurate, and the individual lakes have a fair bit of uncertainty. What we could provide are sort of like what's in right now in the AIS Explorer surveillance tab. It's the likelihood that pick your lake is going to become infested. These models work through simulations, and we run 1,000 simulations, and the number of times that lake gets infested in that model iteration. So I could tell a legislator, for example, that their favorite lake has a 30% chance of becoming infested if the funding were to go away, a 30% higher chance of becoming infested. And that's a level of detail that we don't currently present, but I can check with the team and see how hard it would be to sort of maybe get a list of top 20 lakes or something like that that would be the next ones on the list.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Nick. Outstanding presentation, Nick. That was great. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Let's give a round of applause and appreciation for Nick's presentation. Go ahead and use the react button there. Much appreciated, Nick. So we're going to go into break now. I'm looking at the clock. It's now 2:13. So let's reconvene at 2:23. And then we'll hear from Steve Henry from Cass County. Thanks, everybody.
See you all soon.
For those that are just joining us now, just letting you know that we're reconvening at 2:23.
Hey Doug, it's Drew. Quick question for you.
Yeah, what's up?
What do you think's best for our 2:30, the survey talk? I can't fill 45 minutes. Do you think we should have me and Spencer and Amanda chat and then kind of open up for discussion, or do you think it's better to kind of run through the survey?
I would
'Cause I
briefly,
didn't prepare a PowerPoint or anything. I was thinking it was going to be more of a discussion panel.
sure, that would be fine. Yeah, you could show the survey and then could discuss maybe a couple of elements of the survey, and certainly you can go through with Spencer and Amanda as well, the purpose and the intent, and
Cool.
why we're trying to gather this information.
Copy that. Just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yep. Oh, sounds good. Thanks, Drew.
Yep.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a chance to stretch your legs, get something to drink, a little bio break. So I see it's 2:23, so let's get started with our second part of our session. We're going to hear from Steve Henry, Cass County AIS program, about his work on the analysis of curbing the spread. Steve, are you ready to take it away?
I think so, Doug.
Okay, great.
Just grab my screen here. All right. So I'm following Nick, and Nick mentioned he picked up the bat phone there, and you might have noticed I was not one of the super smart people on the other end. I've been with Soil and Waters for 10 years. For 4 years, I was with the Water Quality Lab, and now I've been in this AIS position for 3 years. A lot of exposure, a lot of learning how to talk in other people's languages, and a lot of looking at data and maybe bouncing things to other people. Definitely not the smartest person in the room, and there's often others who can explain my case in better words, but as Nick was saying, you know, we all have our own positions in advocating, and so some of us can carry this further than others. So as I worked through my annual reporting, I was updating a graph that my predecessor had made that looked at all the new AIS infestations in the state. And it didn't really seem to tell the story I was expecting. I think most of you are probably familiar with the invasion curve. I borrowed this from Cornell, who had borrowed it from Montana State University. Is that as the infestation comes in, you get some gradual spread until it really gets a foothold, and then it really takes off, and until you get to that upper part of the curve there where most of the area is infested, you don't really see a slacking in that rate of new infestations. And just looking at that graph that Dana Gutzman had been working on, that wasn't the story I saw. So
Steve?
I put that, go ahead.
Sorry, Steve. I'm not seeing any slides. Are you intending to show some slides?
You're not seeing any slides? I would thought I was showing slides. Somehow it didn't share.
Do you see the share button in the upper right-hand corner there next to the leave button?
I do, okay. Oh boy, 1 sec. It wants me to get a different Adobe, so I have a second method set up here.
Sure, no worries.
As we were saying though, learning how to speak it in another recipient's language has kind of been one of our. Are we sharing now?
Not yet on my end. Rafa, are you seeing the screen?
Something went wrong.
I am not.
Okay. So it's not just me then.
No, and it tells me on my end something is.
Yeah, because you should be able to just when you click on the share button, it should just list you the screen and then just click on the screen that you see. So even if you have Adobe, since you're just sharing the screen, it shouldn't be asking you to get a different Adobe. Yeah.
No, it just tells me something's going wrong each time.
Well, that's okay.
An alternative, Steve, is that you could send it to me and then I could share my screen.
It's really going to help me use all my time because I wasn't sure how I was going to use all my time.
We can switch up and go to Drew while you figure it out, and then if we have time at the end, we can come back to you. That's a possibility.
Yeah.
Because I think, Drew, are you ready? Will you be able to do that?
I think I heard my name. I just stepped out of the room for a second.
Oh,
was
no,
that?
no. We're having some technical difficulties with some of the slides, so we were wondering if you could just go ahead while Steve figures that out on his side. Oh,
Absolutely.
okay, perfect.
Yeah, let's do
and
that.
so
Okay, give me
Steve,
just go ahead.
yeah, you get ready. And Steve, what you can do is you can also send those slides to me and Doug, because if worst comes to worst, we can share those for you.
All right, give me just a couple seconds here to find a screen that I want to share, and then we'll get going.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Drew.
Okay, are you guys seeing the assessing the impacts of reduced local blah, blah, blah?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Dickhart. I am the coordinator of the Aquatic Invasive Species Program for Carver County. So Southwest Metro, kind of just south of Lake Minnetonka. I'm also a member of the Minnesota DNR Aquatic Invasive Species Advisory Committee. So I'm kind of chatting in from that perspective today. Originally, when invited to speak tonight, I was going to give kind of a summary of responses that we got from a survey that the committee kind of developed and distributed regarding the upcoming prevention aid decrease in Minnesota. However, it took the committee longer to develop the survey and get it approved and sent out. And that actually just went out earlier today, kind of late morning. So if you haven't seen that yet, it should be sitting in your inbox if you are a county AIS coordinator. So I guess a little bit of background here. And I think I saw Amanda and Spencer here too. There are two other members of the committee. So if I'm missing anything, guys, feel free to pop in here. So I'll pivot a little bit. Instead of kind of going through the results from the survey, just kind of introduce the survey to you as county coordinators and just anyone who's on the call here, and kind of go through the purpose of it. So this survey was kind of born a while back in what we call SASAC, the State AIS Advisory Committee. We advised the DNR on its AIS program. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of kind of last legislative session, and through the governor's budget, there was a proposal to slash 50% of the county state aid, which was $10 million. Doug kind of went through this, I think, earlier. $10 million that went out to the counties to basically help fund their AIS prevention programs. That is slated to be cut 50% to $5 million starting just next year in 2027. So this funding cut was sort of abrupt, and when everyone noticed that this was happening, it caused a little bit of a flurry, and discussions came up within the committee, the advisory committee, and other committees, and just kind of within the AIS community. So a lot of uncertainty was going around, a lot of concern. So we had multiple discussions within the committee on what does this mean? How do we prepare for this? Who do we talk to about this? Can we advocate against this? So these are questions that we kind of looked into, and we thought that sending a survey to all or most, hopefully all of the county AIS coordinators would give us as a committee and the DNR and AIS community as a whole some insight on how programs may have to shift to respond to this funding decrease. So we put together about a survey that takes about 15-20 minutes. It has a decent amount of questions, but we tried to put them together in a way that are easier to answer and it will be hopefully simple to summarize at the end and then share with everyone in a kind of succinct way. So I don't think I need to read what I have on here, but I did want to share. So if you're an AIS coordinator and you find this email in your inbox, this is the survey that you will get when you click the link. And I don't think I'm going to go through this entire survey. I'm going to leave that for you to go through, but I can give you kind of an introduction to it. This is the main page. We used, so Maddie Hayden over at MACERC helped us put this survey together in MACERC's, I guess, survey program. I don't think it's called Qualtrics. So she is the one who took time to go through here and take all of our questions and put them into the survey. And we sent them to Nick and some folks at DNR for approval. And finally, we're able to get that up today. So anyway, I don't remember exactly how many questions it is, maybe 20 or 25, Doug, sound about right?
Yeah, I'll
And then
closer to 30 now, but yeah.
Was it after the new ones? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, after after we added a couple questions. Yep.
It's pretty easy to navigate, as you can see. Just navigate through here. There's some instructions on here. We really do want to try to get 100% response rate from all 83 counties. This is a very meaningful survey, and with the more responses we get, that just really help us as a committee and as, like I said, as the DNR staff and county coordinators, just help us plan for the future as we're kind of getting ready for this, our new potential new programs as we move into 2027. So we'll ask for your name in the county. All of that will be just for internal use, so you don't have to worry about anything you say getting out there. And then we just hop into some questions. We want to know about what your role is with the county. Are you supervisor, coordinator, kind of what your title is over there, how long you've been in the role. We'll ask a lot of questions about how you rank activities in your AIS program and how those activities may change due to the funding change. We'll ask questions, and again, I won't go through all of this, but we'll ask questions like, how do you feel, what kind of support will you have from county leadership and program partners as the state funding decreases? Do you think that you'll have the ability to kind of fill that funding gap? Will you have to eliminate parts of your program? Will you have to eliminate the program? How will you deal with staffing? Some counties may have to eliminate their AIS coordinator position. We don't know how that's going to affect counties yet. So again, these are ways to sort of get these answers and summarize them. I think I already said the survey is somewhat brief, about 15 minutes. I've taken it twice yet, and it was actually pretty quick and easy to read. We did go through a couple iterations of updates and tweaks, and I think we ended up with a few more questions than we wanted, but we determined that they were all meaningful, and some of them are just asking same questions in different ways to make sure we capture the answers. Let's see. I don't really know where else to go from there. I think we chose April 7th to complete the survey by. So I don't know if that's about 2 weeks. I think that should be good. Hopefully too many folks aren't out on vacation. So I think, like I said, we kind of have to pivot. We don't have the answers summarized to go through with you yet. I don't know if Spencer or Amanda or Kelly from DNR maybe has anything to add here. Otherwise, we could sort of open up for some discussion, perhaps on maybe some folks are able to answer some of these questions. I know this is a recorded session, so probably won't get into too much detail politically or anything. But I think I'll stop talking there. I see Spencer popped on, and maybe we can get kind of open up for discussion. If not, we can sort of transition into kind of the upcoming panel that's coming up next.
Thanks, Andrew.
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to pop in and say thank you for the people on the state AIS advisory committee that put this together. We started this back in December, or that's what caused us to want to do this. And then we spent January and February putting this thing together. Lots of iterations. We had Doug Jensen's experts survey creation experience to make sure that we don't ask leading questions or double-barreled questions or things like that, so that we can confidently say that this will be a robust survey and that the data will be useful and have some integrity to it. So, yeah, this fulfills part of this SASAC's mission, which is to gather and make excellent recommendations to the DNR on how to make their AIS program the best it can be. And they didn't have the capacity to do this survey, but we worked on it as a committee to make it so that the people that need information to make decisions are able to do that. So thanks.
Thanks, Spencer, for your comments. Any of the other committee members would like to chime in? I'll just make one important distinction is that, and Drew, you showed this in the second slide, but we want one survey per county. So if you have multiple staff that have received the survey, we would like you to consult with one another and answer as a unit. And we surely appreciate it if we could get 100% response from all 83 counties. That'd be wonderful.
My input is
Yeah.
to do the survey. You put on the top of your to-do list, right up there, and then you can just cross it off if you're one of those analog people and can, yes, I did it.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not painful. Pretty painless, actually. We only ask a few questions that you might have to pull out your budgets and do some simple math, but everything else is pretty much multiple choice, a couple open-ended, write in your answer questions. Please feel free to be as detailed as you're comfortable with. Again, hopefully we get these done by April 7th. I'm not sure yet how or in what capacity we will summarize and then distribute kind of answers or a summary of these answers to especially the AIS coordinators. Like I said, we were going to kind of go through that today. So we'll get with Doug and Rafa and figure out the best way to do that, hopefully here within the next month or so, maybe at a different workshop, perhaps, I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess let's open up for some questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, Drew, and I think if we're able to, we might be able to have those results in time for the in-person workshops, which I think will be amazing.
Yeah, good point. Excellent.
Questions from folks about the survey, about the process. Spencer.
Oh, I was just doing a positive reaction. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, big thanks and shout out to everyone, in the SASAC committee who worked hard on this. We had a little subcommittee and we all spent quite a bit of time in random last minute meetings trying to go through and make edits, and big thanks to Maddie over at MACERC for helping out as well. Yeah, not seeing any questions coming in the email that I sent out. I sent it from my email, so Andrew Dickhart. And if you do have questions, feel free to email me back. I'm pretty sure the survey itself has my email. Yep, I'm seeing it right there. Or just give me a call even if anything isn't making sense. So I'll end there.
I see there's
yeah.
a question from Kevin Farnham. Are we able to print out the survey so we can discuss it as a team? You should have the ability, Kevin. You have to go page by page and then save each page as a PDF.
I'm still very new to Qualtrics, but I could see if I can download that as a PDF. I'll just ask Ethan, and I can shoot you that in an email, Doug.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be terrific. That would be easier for sure. It's a little clunky to do it that way, but the way I suggested, download each web page, but
Okay, yeah,
That was-
it does seem that multiple people want that option, so I'm sure we can get that done.
Yeah, Kevin, Krista, we see you. We will try to make that happen.
yeah, Maddie, even if you just send it to us as a PDF, we can send it out to the counties in another email.
Sounds great. And we do have some responses, so thank you guys to those that have already completed it.
It's amazing. Thank you. I do want to take the time to just to mention. I think a lot of you know about SASAC. We might have some newer coordinators here, but SASAC is a committee that basically just advises us, the DNR, on everything AIS. And I do want to mention that all of this, they're volunteers. They're not doing this as part of their job. They're just taking out time. They apply to be in the committee and they serve for a whole year. So everything they're doing on their own time, and they've done an amazing job with this. Doug and I work with them all the time, and we've seen the amount of effort, we've seen the amount of time. Even for last year, they wrote a letter to the commissioner to mention about the aid. So they've been highly involved. So please, if you can take the time to fill that out, I just know the amount of work that they put in, and it's going to inform all of us. It's going to give us amazing information for us at the DNR. I'm sure Macerk is also going to get great information, and you all as county coordinators, you'll know what everybody else is doing. So yeah, just want to thank you all, and especially you, Drew, for taking this on. I know that is a lot. So
Yeah, and if you are interested in applying to SASAC for 2027, we will have several openings. It's not a huge commitment. We have 4 meetings from January to April, and then we take a hiatus during the summer, and then we reconvene in August and meet through December. So our meetings are usually about 5 hours long or so, with a lunch break, and we bring in outside presenters and also DNR presentations as well. So we have quite a bit to offer in terms of a learning experience and being able to help promote AIS prevention and make suggestions of DNR. Spencer.
Yeah, Spencer here again. A couple things, outlets for this potential survey to go to. I mean, obviously this is a work of SASAC, so it's going to be, the results will be posted on the SASAC's website on the DNR. Potentially added as testimony, or the basis of testimony for legislative discussion, not within outside of our job duties, right? But these pieces of information will be useful for legislators to know about, county commissioners, and also useful for lake associations and lake advocacy groups to know about too. So there's going to be lots of information sharing about the results of this to go in to make excellent decisions for the future of the state's AIS prevention program. So your earnest feedback and doing of this is extremely appreciated and extremely important.
And we're planning to prepare a report that provides interpretation on the data, because we just don't want the data to go out there and be somehow misinterpreted.
Yes.
And we'll also put together a presentation so that we'll have something that we'll be able to present via workshops.
okay. Well, any questions? Last minute questions from anybody? If not, I think we might be ready for Steve Henry. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Drew, for your presentation. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, well, let's turn it over to Steve if he's ready. I see we have a slide up, so that's good news.
That is great news. Thank you everyone for bearing with me there. So a little bit on messaging, what I noticed in the data, how I use it. And then, as Spencer and Drew have said, reaching out to lobby where appropriate, and equipping the individuals around you so they can do the same. So in my background, I've had exposure to this invasion curve, which we're probably all fairly familiar with. Invasive species come in, they get a foothold, expand rapidly until they get near saturation in the resource. And then we might see some rate change in that spread. And this is that graph that was something that was already in existence when I started the position, and I just kept updating it, but it didn't appear to me to align with the invasion curve. And that's when I bounced it off to Doug and Nick and said, what do you guys see in this? And that's something I do with a lot of different things, is bounce it to someone who can maybe research it with more validity. But what do I see in the curve, and how do I try and explain it to people? Of course, we did have a little bounce back up this year in new AIS infestations. We're still well down below the trend line where it would have been had we not come down into the 40s there. Normally, we often just see zebra mussel infested lakes portrayed as a cumulative total, and we see that climbing line. And one of the biggest problems my inspectors have is they say, people say zebra mussels are already everywhere. They're going to be everywhere. So one of the things we did for them is we made a sign in Cass County. More than 90% of our lakes are AIS free. So they have a sign now when people come into the access, they encounter that information prior to the inspection to try and set the tone for why are we doing this. Now, a lot of the groups I present to are, they have IRAs, 401ks. They might be kind of high in their thought process. And so I like to talk about the rate of spread. Yes, we have more and more lakes each year. We were gaining really fast for quite a while there, over 40%. Even that 2014, 2015, 25+%. But you can see now we're down in that 8%. I think our 3-year running average is right around 7. So we talk about that bending the curve. We're definitely not spreading at the same rate we were before. There's a ton of confounding factors in there. Lake suitability. So nutrient levels, calcium levels. I've looked at disturbed versus forested watersheds. Forested watersheds are much less likely to be infested versus disturbed watersheds. So there's a ton of things that are acting into this, but just sheer lake popularity doesn't appear to be it. I tell people we're seeing a reduction in spread because everyone's acting better at the access. You're all implementing better practices. Before you go somewhere, maybe you take the boat out earlier and let it dry longer. I'm learning every year still. I pull the boat out now at my local access. I know there's tools there to clean the boat. I go grab the tool before I even check the boat. My boys help me ensure that I'm checking the boat completely. So I know that we're all getting better, and that's really matters because inspectors aren't out there the whole time. So I try it and instill that in people. It's still important and we're getting better. And there's big payoffs to that, really. So again, normally we look at just a cumulative total of lakes. Look at the number, it's going up and up. If we look at the infested lakes versus the number of lakes we have with public accesses, we're not climbing nearly as fast. If I stretch that graph out to 2100, pretty far out there in the future, but it's starting to look a little bit more like an invasion curve, but it's not this short timeline. You know, we're talking about generations from now that people might still be working on preventing the spread of, in this case, zebra mussels. But as Nick alluded to, there's numerous species on our doorsteps that clean, drain, and dry behaviors are going to help contain them. And I realized when I did that graph that I had all the infested lakes and not just the publicly accessible lakes. And again, this gets into where I'm not exactly a scientist or a statistician, so I had to play with the infested waters list because the lake ID numbers in there don't match the lake ID numbers, the DAO numbers that are in the accessible list that we get every year from Department of Management and Budget. So as near as I could tell, we have about 350 infested lakes out of our 2,450 lakes that have a public access in Minnesota. So we're really only less than 20% of our publicly accessible lakes are infested. As mentioned, you know, it skews towards popular. It probably skews towards larger, which also equates with more accesses. And one thing we have in Cass County is a lot of private harbors, resort accesses on those larger lakes that aren't controlled. So a lot of factors in there, but I think Nick and the team might be able to draw something out with the new genomic study. So if we're just looking at lakes with public accesses infested with zebra mussels, pretty low. Our rate of spread on lakes with public accesses, a little bit different rate of spread here. So now we top out on the trend line at about 40, but we do see that coming down after 2014 again, when there was a lot more education and engagement and inspectors at accesses out there. The rate of spread comes down considerably. Now, being not a statistician, I could maybe play with this a little bit again and say, what if in 2019 we had just stabilized there at that 20% spread rate? Instead of 350 lakes, we'd be looking at 592 lakes. Just that small change in spread rate has a huge change on that cumulative number. If we hop back to that 2018 there at about 27%, if we would have stayed at 27%, we would have not have 350 infested lakes. We'd have 1,052. So again, more infested lakes, more propagule pressure, more risky boats moving, more exposure chances for infestation. So here we are, we're down at 350. We are not, you know, almost halfway up this graph there at over 1,000, where we could be if we didn't see the types of behavior change and effective interventions that we've seen applied through the county AIS funds and Minnesota DNR's program. So when I look at the invasion curve now, I see that we're really still down in this containment box, where these types of activities are really important because we hope that management options do start to emerge through the research that we are investing in. If that does happen, our control costs are going to be much lower. So it keeps us with that opportunity that does a management option emerge that can be applied to really help in these situations, or even with containment, you know, even boat redesign that we are seeing in some manufacturers is going to help with all these things.
Steve, if
So,
I could just chime in just for a second. This graph that you're showing there was not produced from Minnesota. It comes from outside of Minnesota. Most other states are along that line in which they conduct public awareness. Minnesota is actually way down in the eradication zone
on the
on that curve. Yep. So we stand out very differently from where we began with prevention activities in the state. Thanks.
And that's one thing we noticed when we tried to do some cross-state comparisons, is that we go from 20% zebra mussels in Minnesota. The nearest I could tell out in Michigan, it's over 50%. And starry stonewort's in about 13% of lakes in Michigan, and we're only at about 2% or less in Minnesota. So we are in a really good position, partially because of the effective interventions we're employing. Now, I did that popular lakes as a sources. I thought about trying to incorporate some of the genomic study that's come out of MACERC here that looks at zebra mussel spread based on the genetics. And one of the things that they pointed out in there is that, in the Detroit Lakes area, it wasn't pelican, which is a big high use lake, as the spreader, but really Lizzie spread to numerous lakes. In the Brainerd Lakes area, gull, we inspect on gull thousands of boats, many boats an hour, a lot of risky boats headed places. Gull did not seem to have infested anything, but Rice Lake, which is kind of a backwater on the Mississippi, numerous lakes. So Mille Lacs was the one that when it got infested, everyone, it was going to be a super spreader. But DNR did focus a lot of effort out there. And genetically, Mille Lacs was only shown to be tied to 3 lakes. I believe it was Centerville, Peltier, and something else. So just kind of what the layman might perceive from that is that prevention effort was effective at containing an invasive species when it was focused on those super spreader popular lakes as sources, and maybe not as effective on those low use lakes that didn't see the same amount of attention. The big hiccup I had with that data was those infestations were pre-2014, so we weren't seeing the intensiveness of the intervention that we would see post-2014. And I guess that's something, if I dig in another set of data, is there anything we can see from the genomics there where focused prevention, Gull Lake, we inspect at least 4 days a week, and DNR is normally out there on days we're not. And so we're covering in excess of 75% of the boats that go through that axis from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. There appears to be an effectiveness in that, not statistically, but from the layman's point of view. So again, we try and keep things real simple. This is really close to the sign we have out on axes. When people come in, why does it still matter? This is basically statewide. What the numbers seem to be telling me is that about 14.5% of the axes in Minnesota, or the lakes in Minnesota that have a public access, are infested with zebra mussels. In Cass County, it's much smaller, but we went with 90% because it gave us some breathing room when our signs wouldn't go out of date too fast. So if you have interesting ideas, you see things in the data, feel free to bounce them off of people. We're not our own best advocates, but together we can really tell a great story and reach the people we need to reach.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your presentation. Just checking the time here. Yes, we have a few minutes for questions for Steve.
And as Nick said, he threw a whole team at this. If you want to filter your questions through MACERC, that's great. I do love throwing ideas back and forth and developing things, as Doug knows.
Well, great job of adding another piece of data to our scenario here and to support that compelling story.
Yeah, if your IRA had been gaining at 50% and we're down to 5%, you would have some serious questions.
That's a good analogy. I like that. I'm going to borrow that next time. Spencer.
Yeah, this is just something I've sort of bounced off of Steve and other folks here. One of my sort of talking points is, is it inevitable that all the lakes in the state will become infested? If there's a certain percentage each year that does, I suppose you could say yes. However, that rate of change isn't necessarily constant, number one. Number two, just because something has zebra mussels doesn't mean that it can be prevented from getting Eurasian water milfoil or starry stonewort or invasive fish or pathogens. So those things had to be factored in as well. And also, the curve flattening, the slowing of the rate of spread, that reduction in the rate of change. So that's below that one number that was it Dr. Kingsley worked on. We want to be in a spot, and you took your map out to like 2100, that in 50 years or 100 years, we don't need to go in and do intensive management on all these bodies of water. We can just do it on, like, say, half the 5,000 or half the 2,200, right, that have public water accesses. So it really needs to be, we need to think about this in like a generational sense, right? That we're going to probably be retired before, this can get fully worked on or restored, but we need to preserve the resources we have now so that the science can catch up. Thanks.
Well, I would just add to that we're still learning about the science, such as the mercury availability that zebra mussels contribute to. We're having a fisheries input group tomorrow. We're interested to find out if the walleye eggs in Leech Lake are not turning into fry due to exposure to zebra mussel induced methyl mercury. They haven't shared the data with us yet, which makes us think it's going to be kind of hot data when we do get it tomorrow at 10 a.m. So there's things we don't know about the invasives we have now that could be quite detrimental, and this containment is giving us a chance to get all of our details in order.
Doug, I see Kevin's got a question in the chat that I think is a good one that we can try and dig into too, because
Yep.
I've thought about it as well.
Yeah, I guess this would be a thought for Steve and everyone else here. Has anyone done any calculations use surface area of lakes for infestations? With most large lakes being infested, it may show we are seeing good results from the aid, but it also may be skewed from only smaller lakes that are left. That sounds like it would be a major question.
Yeah. Well, and this is one I actually got from an angler, which means it's something I should probably chase down because they might find it meaningful. I haven't done that analysis yet. I know we have some large lakes that see several boaters a day that have left zebra mussel infested lakes within the last 24 hours, but they're not infested. So we are seeing some large lakes persist under a high pressure.
Yeah, Kevin, I've heard this question asked many times, and I think it was probably from you as well. But I've always struggled with what would we do with that information? That's the part I struggle with. But maybe I'm not thinking about it in the right way. Well, if you have any comments about that, please chime in. We do have another comment. Raining White asks, is there a geographical difference in infestation distribution? For starry stonewort, it seems to follow that Highway 371 corridor north and then spreads out in North Cass, Beltrami counties. I don't know the answer to the question, so if somebody else
I think
does.
that'd be another great one for the university. Is how has it hopscotched once it got that initial start? So raining's right in the Walker area here. He's my neighbor right here, and it has hopscotched not far from its initial infestations generally. But Bowen and Thunder would provide some more information where it has gone nearly an hour. So I think that deserves a deeper dive too.
Thanks,
Or-
Steve. John Dennis
See-
also has some comments about monitoring in the state, and I put in a response to it. But I also like to say that while we don't have a comprehensive monitoring program in the state of Minnesota, it's much better than most other states in the United States. And just the counties alone in 2024 surveyed 505 lakes and rivers for aquatic invasive species. So a lot of those lakes are getting hit. I don't know if they are on a rotational basis or if it's the same water bodies, but we are detecting much earlier zebra mussel infestations, Eurasian water milfoil, and starry stonewort because of those efforts. Thanks.
Say, Doug, are we in the panel time now? Should I be responding if I, or should I just go in the chat?
One
Should I
more
interrupt?
minute. One more
Okay.
minute, Nick. It's half
So
really
yeah,
a panel discussion,
the
though, isn't it?
detection effort that probably caused an initial blip there in those 100 lakes in 1 year. But now we feel that detection effort is high and consistent, as Doug mentioned, although I do feel DNR's veliger sampling maybe skewed our numbers a little higher this year because they did detect infestations based just on veligers alone in several lake systems. But here in Cass County, we had 2 detections last year, one by a diver that could only find a couple individuals in a couple locations, even when DNR resurveyed. And then another lake from a lake service provider who reported a dock with zebra mussels, very localized. Again, we could only find a couple sites in that lake that had a few individuals. So beyond that initial potential surge, we feel that detection effort has been pretty high and consistent. And isn't skewing our numbers any longer. Layman's analysis. Clause.
Yeah, good analysis. Thank you so much, Steve, for your time and expertise, and glad the technology finally worked out for you. All right, let's now move into our local AIS Prevention Aid panel. We've heard from me and Nick Phelps and Steve and Drew, and we'd like to welcome Kelly Pennington, who is the supervisor for the DNR's Invasive Species Unit. So what we're going to do is, for those panelists that would like to have some opening remarks, we'll start with Kelly.
Thanks. Good afternoon. For those of you who missed it earlier, I'm Kelly Pennington. I supervise the Invasive Species Unit here in the Division of Ecological and Water Resources at the Minnesota DNR. And I don't know that I have a lot of remarks to add to the great presentations that we just saw. I think it was a good showcase of sort of some different perspectives on the AIS prevention successes that we've seen in Minnesota, and that really just demonstrates kind of the strength of the different organizations and the partnerships that we've created in Minnesota to work on AIS in the state. So excited to be here and to be on the panel and looking forward to the discussion.
You are muted, Doug.
Yep, sorry about that. Nick, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Not by way of opening remarks, hammering out some responses in the chat, though, to people who had questions earlier.
Great. Steve or Drew, any maybe perspectives on what you've heard today?
I'm just always so impressed with what I see with everyone else doing and the enthusiasm and knowing that I might not be the best person to carry a baton forward, but boy, there's about 87. Oh, we got 80 right now. People in here that are really well equipped along with me.
I was gonna kind of have the same sentiments. There's a lot of folks here, which is great. A lot of folks out there that really care and are working hard to, with their AIS programs and lake associations and folks. So good time to ask us questions, get your concerns, comments, anything out there, I guess.
And I do want to add for everybody, the audience, I did turn on your option to turn on your cameras since it's a panel. There's no presentation going on. You're welcome to turn on your cameras. Sometimes it helps for the panelists to see your reactions of what you're asking, and yeah. So just to let you know, that's an option now. Take it away, Doug.
Well, I'll just build off of Steve's comment and say that I've been in this aquatic invasive species arena now going on 33 years, amazingly, in October. And when we first started the efforts here in Minnesota, it was quite limited. We didn't have a lot of capacity at the time. I mean, I was invited by DNR as the only outsider to join their weekly staff meetings on Tuesday mornings. And I tried to come down from Duluth at least once a month to join forces with them and coordinate efforts statewide. There were 7 people besides me in that office. And what Kelly, we had a recent retreat of invasive species unit staff, and I think there was 52 people that showed up. So think of that in terms of the overall capacity building and the expertise that has been built, and then also layer that with the expertise that was built through the county aid and the AIS county coordinators. There's been tremendous amount of capacity that's been built up, and there's no other state that has this type of program. Other questions, comments from the floor? There's got to be some burning questions out there.
Yeah, even some of the previous presentations, I know that Nick had a lot of questions during his section. So if there's something that wasn't answered, if there's anything that you really want to know, that's why we have these panelists here. You have a lot of different perspectives, and this is more of a conversation. So I think we have Mike.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
Then we'll go to Kevin next. I see he has something in the chat. Thanks. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think the panel's great. Just a question I have, and whoever can kind of answer it, but just thinking with the government cuts or the cuts to local government aid, and then also like the changes to the boater registration fee increases, likely the public doesn't understand kind of some of these differences on funding streams. So with these and other differences in fundings, across the state, across agencies from, local to state or others, has anybody looked at ways to really prioritize how the dollars are utilized by all stakeholders that receive kind of AIS funding, to kind of create that best network for AIS prevention in the state?
Which of our panelists would like to field the question?
And I want to add on to that question, because I think what Mike was saying, or what I want to add on from what Mike was saying, is that commissioners are hearing from legislature things like the AIS prevention is decreasing, but there's surcharge for boat registration is increasing, and the NENTRF community grants and the invasive plant removal grants are increasing. So people high up are hearing like, yes, that's decreasing, but then all of these are increasing, and how to get the information out that they are not equal. Like, yes, we're thankful that these things are increasing, but they're not going towards the AIS prevention aid.
And I had written that down for Kelly actually, because I get the same thing as Amanda. Yes, the county's capacity for inspections is going to change, but the DNRs is going to be increasing. Well, that's something I don't have a good handle on. I know Nick had sent something out. So I had that as a question too. So if together as a panel we can maybe get at that, that would be great information for the county coordinators. I think through MACERC, Dr. Kinsley is doing some more work where we're going to try some cross-border collaboration, which just barely is getting our toes, I think, into what Mike is saying, because I think Mike's maybe talking about a bigger network. So just moving the ball along a little bit here at a time. Anyone else?
I can chime in a little bit. I'll drop into the chat a couple of papers that we've published on this topic, Mike, if I'm understanding your question correctly. It's a complicated system we have here where we have multiple layers of management and funding available and decisions being made, sometimes independently, sometimes in coordination. There's just a lot going on. The conclusion from the papers are pretty similar in that there's definitely advantages from higher level, more statewide strategy and implementation. Financially speaking, there's more efficiencies to be gained at a higher level of management. But we recognize too the need and the insight that local managers have in making decisions in their backyards. So the outcomes really are a need for better collaboration and coordination across these levels. How that plays out for all these different things we're involved with is really hard. What Steve mentioned for Dr. Kinsley's work on the county collaboration networks are trying to optimize these collaborations in a way, but I think where there's going to be the most meaningful gains are when people are coming to the table proactively and voluntarily to share resources, to share objectives, and make these decisions together. And right now, that doesn't always happen, I think it's fair to say. So I think there's a lot of improvement that can be done there. And even with a shift towards centralized resources, local managers need to be at the table to help allocate those and have that local perspective.
Any other comments here? Otherwise, we'll move on to, oh, did I hear somebody want to speak? Go for it.
Doug, I just heard a couple questions that maybe we can try to address. I'm not sure if we're jumping into that part though yet.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So I saw in the chat and heard a couple questions just kind of about DNR's role with respect to AIS Prevention Aid. I think many people on the call appreciate this, but so apologies for those of you for whom it's a review. But the AIS Prevention Aid is administered by the Department of Revenue, a separate state agency. That funding goes directly to the counties. We have, since about the beginning of the AIS Prevention Aid, had two staff, now that's Doug and Rafa, who support the counties, provide technical support, provide coordination among the counties. But we don't have any role in distributing the funds, and the funds do not come to DNR. So with respect to the questions about how this will affect our program, not in that direct sense of the funding coming to us or not. The AIS surcharge increase is another separate thing. Those funds go directly into the invasive species account in the state treasury. So that AIS surcharge increase also does not come directly to the DNR or to our program, those funds still need to be appropriated by the state legislature to the DNR for invasive species program use. So that increase, according to the proposal in that legislative session, went mainly towards increasing invasive aquatic plant management grants and increasing some staff to support invasive species management. So just to clarify that those are two separate things, two separate agencies, and with respect to a comment about like whether we would backfill, you know, it's just not even the same amount of funding. So it's the AIS surcharge increase was not intended to and won't be able to replace decreases to the AIS Prevention Aid. I think someone also said that watercraft inspection would increase at DNR, and we are not directly using the AIS surcharge increase to support increased watercraft inspections at the DNR right now.
Thanks, Kelly, for that. I guess where I was going with it was kind of like that 10,000 foot level, knowing that not all agencies are maybe at the table and they have different pots of funding that can do different things. But yeah, knowing it's not like, oh, we're going to take this pot now and funnel it over here. And kind of my perspective on this is in Lake of the Woods County, you know, we have Lake of the Woods. It's, you know, one of the premier fishing destinations. But the formula works kind of against us. Out of the $10 million, we get about $58,000 annually. So we have a very small inspection program that we're very successful. We do a lot of inspections. But with that, in the early part of the inspection time where DNR was doing inspections, they were doing some up here. They haven't been since, I don't know, the last probably 10 years almost. So in my mind, like, prioritizing where we do things as a state or prioritizing how we can all work together with the funds that we have, I think is beneficial. Because there's going to be some things that, like, if my budget's cut in half, I can't do an inspection program on $28,000. It's just not realistic. So anyways, that's kind of where I was going with that, and just knowing, I think we have to partner together more to do the best AIS prevention that we can in the state. But that's kind of where I was coming from. But thanks for taking my comments.
Yeah, Mike, this is Drew. I think that, you know, our county coordinator survey, you know, we had some of these discussions too. You know, are we going to be able to backfill things? What's going to happen with local, you know, county budgets, watersheds who are contributing? Are they going to want to contribute more to partnerships? Are they going to kind of follow suit to this decrease in funding and say, hey, is the state going to, if the state's decreasing funds, we're going to decrease funds? So I think that this survey is maybe one of our early on methods to try to figure out a little bit beforehand, you know, how to address these things. How can we maybe not necessarily backfill funds, but find ways where local partners can get together and just kind of trial and error. How can we work better together, more efficiently? So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions. Great question.
And thank you, Kelly. That kind of got at some of the information I try and share with my partners. I know that of the inspections statewide, the county programs do about 80%. And so, again, layman math, you whack half of the budget, you lose 40% of the inspections. And now with the information you gave me, I can say, you know, unfortunately, due to legislative allocation methods, the DNR doesn't have any additional funds for watercraft inspections from the current surcharge. And that, again, equipping my partners so when they talk to their legislators, they can say, hey, the real effect of this is inspections are going to drop dramatically.
Spencer.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Steve. I was going to point that out too. Like 8 out of 10 watercraft are inspected by LGUs. So the 50% reduction is pretty substantial in terms of the amount of effort that would be reduced. And there's no, the DNR doesn't have the budget, the capacity, or any ability to backfill that. Which brings me to a point that I am not afraid to make when people have questions about what this looks like. You know, as leaders here, we're all probably familiar with the term the Hatch Act, right? Which is a federal law passed, I think, during Franklin Roosevelt's term that limits people in executive agencies from, you know, advocating for political causes, being involved in partisan elections and things like that, or saying you should do this or you should do that on conditions. But if someone asks me, you know, Spencer, as the AIS coordinator, what does this mean for our program? I can say that these will probably be the likely consequences of what's going to happen. And then I can also further say that if you feel that this is right or wrong or whatever, I highly encourage you to reach out to your county commissioner or your township officer or your senator or congressman or the commissioner of the DNR or the governor's office, and make your voice heard. And I don't tell them what voice they need to say or what they're going to say, but that's the avenue. And we can't be afraid to tell people. Actually, it empowers them, really. It empowers the public to say, you know, if you think this is an issue, you should definitely talk to someone about it. And I'm not afraid to say that.
Thanks, Spencer. Having been a state employee for a long time, I've run into the issue of the Hatch Act in the past. And it is a fine line between advocacy and education. We are certainly we are all able to respond and to help educate others about what we know about aquatic invasive species and provide that expertise.
There have been some questions in chat that I can bring up.
Yeah.
So
Kevin Farnham posted, I'm trying to find it again because I just went away from it to see if there's any new messages here. Shoot.
About using the information about boats that had plants, mud, water, or AIS attached. Oh, just as a compelling reason for intercepting risky boats. Yeah.
Right.
This is Kevin. Am I on?
Yes, you are. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Steve. I was looking at, there's some data that the inspectors collect and it goes on to the DNR clipboard. And that is whether or not they found anything on the boats. And I was suggesting that, I mean, we all have that data if the inspector is doing how they're trained by DNR. And the data said, and I just put down for part of Stearns County, the data, and it was showing that I think it was like 173 boats out of 7,613 inspections. I mean, that may be a low percentage. And I think you've got to ask yourself the question of how many boats or opportunities does it take to potentially bring a new infestation into that lake. You cannot use the data that goes out on the exit inspection. I had a conversation, I think it was with Angelique, with someone from DNR that, Kelly, you would know, whoever handles that data. And the problem, you can't use the data on the exit, even though they're told that they're supposed to be checking the boat after the boater has a chance to do the cleaning themselves and then to go and do the inspections. Sometimes it always doesn't happen that way. They're rushed. So that data might be a little bit more contaminated. But if you look at just the entry data, that should be relatively clean data. It's a boat coming at them and they're checking it. And it seems like that's a compelling data to explain how important it is to get those inspections. Because chances are that guy's ready to launch. That's when the inspection is happening. He's ready to go. And so that boat is going to go in, whether it be on the trailer or it be on the boat itself. He's going in the water next. That's his next stop. So all of those situations would go in. Now, not all of it is going to be, because they're not identified, not all of them are going to be listed as an aquatic invasive species. Chances are a certain percentage are, and then you got to ask yourself the question, well, how many opportunities does it take to infest the lake? Is it 1? Is it 10? Years ago, I was asked that same question on Listeria monocytogenes, which was in ice cream. How many times do you have to eat it before you get sick from it? And so it's the same deal. You don't know how many it is. So if you want to be conservative, you need to take 1. And so I think that's a very compelling argument to give. We all have it. Putting it together, and that's why maybe Doug and Raphael can help us, because the data's there. It's just, how do we want to use it? What story will it tell?
Kevin, there's been lots of discussions over the years about, how many introductions does it take to cause an infestation, and it's really dependent upon the life cycle and the amount of frequency of introductions, and then also the propagule pressure, which is both like the frequency and the seeding together, and that's what then forms the risk. The only study that I know of was done by Lake Superior Research Institute using spiny water fleas as their model, and they found that it just took a few spiny water fleas in a tank. I believe it was around 10 spiny water fleas to cause an infestation, but I don't know of any other research that shows that for other species.
Say, Doug, I jumped in with my screen sharing, if
Yeah,
you can see
sure.
that. So just to, Kevin, this came up the other day too, and I just threw a slide together to try to better explain myself. The models that we've built have incorporated data that you're describing. Imagine we have sort of these segments in the pathway from an infested lake to an uninfested lake with a boat moving in between. We have in, I don't know if can you see my cursor?
You can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say we have this red arrow. This is within the watercraft inspection data. We built our models to account for like the quote violation rate of boats that have something on them, plants on them. So we have like a likelihood score for infested boats leaving an infested lake with invasive species on them. The number that was harder to get, and I think what you're getting at, is the likelihood then that boat results in a future infestation at an uninfested lake. This is really hard to estimate and depends on a few different things, but the models that we built were all we forced, so we backed into this number by forcing the model to estimate the future or the number of infestations that actually happened. So if we know how many infestations happened in the real world, and we created a model to mimic the real world. And that model then told us what the likelihood was of that contaminated boat resulting in a future infestation somewhere else. It's a very, very small percentage, but it is one that we can estimate. And we've done that for both zebra mussels and starry stonewort. This arrow here, if you can see it moving, I think is what you're trying to get at. It's sort of
that's correct, because you don't know. There's a lot of factors that fit in there, but to a certain extent, as Doug was saying, that's where you have to decide, or somebody needs to decide. We all need to decide if it affects us personally, such as listeria. But you also, in the case of a lake, you need to decide where's the comfort level that you're going to reside. If you're going to reside at, I don't want one, and that's what the MACERC Explorer really kind of helps you go through. If you're comfortable with one time that happening, then you're going to react a certain way. If you're comfortable with if you're okay with 100 times that happens, then you would put your inspectors in certain positions. But if you want to be real conservative, you don't want one. You just have to decide where you want to be on that risk equation.
Yep, and which levers you want to pull. Like when we think about
Yeah.
prevention, we could prevent spread by reducing all of these things by the boat ramp.
But I guess what I'm saying is I'm still thinking though that it still gives you some compelling thing to think about.
Yep.
I don't know if I would have confidence in a legislators, and I'm not picking on them here, but it sounds like it, that their background is capable of making that decision. But they sure can help us in what we do.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for
so, Nick,
listening.
that kind of gets at your multi-intervention model where you can put an inspector there and that'll reduce 95%, but you can also educate a person and they might keep their boat out for 5 days and that reduces transmission in that secondary window. And right now, as Raining alluded to, we have a lot of uninspected accesses with Starry next to the ramp. So when you deleted those plants next to the ramp, that was a very personal linkage there for me. So many levers to pull, and it's all going to become, if budget cuts come a reality, we're all going to need to model that intervention.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be in 83 different ways, but there's going to be some commonality. Hopefully the survey will help bear that out. I see that Raining has his hand up. Go ahead, Raining.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you can hear me. I'm just curious how all you engage as far as prevention aid, tribes first and foremost, and then also partners and stakeholders who don't get this funding directly to them, but are also affected by these cuts. How have you worked with these various either tribes or stakeholders?
If counties would like to respond to that.
I'll jump in. This is Drew of Carver County. We don't have any tribes down here. So coordination with tribes is kind of non-existent. With other, within our program, obviously. For other partners, we have in Carver County, we're quite fortunate. We sort of leverage more funds for specifically our watercraft inspection program. By the way, is my audio better? I had a message that
Yes.
it was
Yes.
okay, good.
Loud and clear.
We actually bring in or leverage more funds than our state aid gives us. So I think Carver County, we get about 140,000, and I think we bring in a little bit more. I can't remember the exact amount. Maybe
167,000 is what you said before.
Is that what I said? Okay.
It is. Yes, it's stuck in my head.
Yeah, and I maybe I hadn't realized how fortunate we are to have that partnership funding available. I don't know how common that is statewide. Anyway, with our partners, and because we do receive so much support, we coordinate closely. I have cities who contribute funds, mainly cities that have access, like a park that has a boat launch on it. They contribute funds to for us to have inspectors there. We have watershed districts that contribute, and then multiple lake associations that contribute. So when it comes to coordination, especially kind of coming into 2027 with potential funding cut, we just kind of I don't know. It's simple to answer. We just I'll talk to the staff and I'll try to gauge what their staff level thoughts are on, are you going to be able to continue the support? And so far, all of the staff level folks are very supportive, and we're kind of just waiting to kind of get into our contract phase to see what those city councils and watershed boards and lake association boards, to see how they will react. So far, it's been nothing but positivity and a little bit of concern along with that. But I guess the easiest way to answer that is this: we all know each other. We all coordinate, not just on AIS inspections, but on other projects, and have kind of a mutual respect, at least on the staff level. Politically, we can't do much. We can talk to other staff and we can have conversations with those decision makers. And I guess that's where I'll stop. That's kind of our theory or our philosophy.
Are there other counties that are working with tribes?
Cass County works with the tribes a lot. Of course, Raining is my partner up here. So we try and get some funding to the tribe. And in approaching the board here that manages the funds, last year we said we'd like to give the tribe some money to fund an inspector. They have different priorities, of course, Wild Rice Lakes, that didn't work into our MACERC model. And so this is an idea to satisfy more partners' goals. The board was willing to do that. We didn't really have an established process. We also have some partnership funds, and that was one thing I had approached the tribe about, was perhaps applying for those funds so we could at least help support their activities that way from the AIS aid. We have a Forest Service grant, and the Forest Service drew that box pretty big as to where that could be expended. And so that's something we've tried to engage both the neighboring counties and the tribes in a little bit of a prioritization process. Much thanks to Raining, who sets up a coordination meeting with the multi-counties, DNR, and interested lake groups. So how are we going to manage Starry and Leech Lake? How are we going to contain it? What might be our options? What might be our funding streams? What is MACERC researching? What could we piggyback on? And really helps me a lot. I don't feel like I've been as successful in supporting you guys' programs as I'd like to be, which is on me. You can toss some ideas out and people will run with them, and some other ones, such as we've been talking about, a umbrella group that would attack Starry at these accesses versus Steve going out to hand pull at the site that isn't big enough to hire a contractor. So we try and be as open as we can and really responsive. The Leech Lake Band, where Raining works, does have EPA recognized water regulations, no herbicides in any waters of the reservation. So that's one thing on our Starry Stoneworts. Although we haven't seen a good response when we did use copper in the area, bulbils were formed on the remnant Starry Stonewort above sediment, and we found it floating around. Was it completely dead, or was it just detached and floating, contributing to spread? So lots of things we talk about with the tribe, but I have to say Raining helps make 60+% of that happen. So.
Can I add something?
Muted, Doug.
Doug?
You're muted, Doug.
Again, I'm muted. I just want to add that Callie from Beltrami County, her microphone isn't working, so I'll just read it. Beltrami County loves to include our tribal neighbors in AIS management and coordination of inspections when available requested. Our waters are connected. Therefore, prevention aid dollars should support collaborative efforts across tribal county borders. Thank you, Kelly.
I wanted to
Go ahead, Phil.
reiterate that. I think it's a really important point. And it's not just where you guys overlap geographically, but what you do, the decisions you're going to make, Andrew, in Carver County going forward are going to impact your county partners and tribal partners up north. Like, it's not just the neighbors, it's the boats are moving around so much. The risk is so spread out that it's going to require really strong partnerships and collaborations. With that said, Doug, you sort of half jokingly said there's going to be 83 different models going forward as folks realize or figure out what this new normal might be. I think it's going to be very important that you all share those plans amongst your peers and with the DNR. So you all, and happy to be in the loop here at MACERC too, so we can help understand what's happening. But if you're pulling a lever in one county, it's going to affect risk in another. And it's really important that you all understand that and are sharing that information so you can respond in some way. And where it makes sense to collect data, nerd alert, I'm happy to get data. So when you guys report your activities, the number of inspections you do with X number of dollars, with this many hours of effort, all that stuff is really helpful. And the analyses I showed would not have been possible without some of that data available. And there's many more questions we want to ask, but we can't because nobody's collected the information or it's not been collected consistently across all areas. I know the Tina for a while, now Doug and Rafa, I assume, are collecting those annual reports from the counties. Super important that folks are filling those out, submitting them. We can learn a lot from that. And I think you guys can learn from each other too if that information is shared.
Yeah, we got a really high response rate submittal this past year, and we're going to publish those soon. So yeah, thank you for getting those in. It's talking about the metrics that you all submit. So thank you.
And Rafa and I will be sending out a new metrics for 2026 for you to use and to fill in. Appreciate all that have reported last year. And I'm not sure how many counties we had report last year, but in 2024, what we have 60, I think, Rafa?
Yes, and we have more than that. I can't, it's more than 60. That's what I can tell you. I'm not as good with memory as you, Doug.
We'd certainly love to have 100%, especially in these days, so we can show collectively what's happening across the state. It's incredible all the work that you folks are doing, and when you collect and combine all that information, it's really impressive.
I think just quick comment. I think what Nick had to say was super important, and thanks for kind of making that distinction. We do have sort of a, I don't know what to call it, sort of a veteran AIS coordinator kind of group. You know, Amanda, Spencer, myself, Steve. I haven't met you personally yet, but you know, there are a lot of us who've been doing this for a long time. We're still learning a ton, obviously, but I have noticed, I think Doug mentioned, some turnover in a lot of the AIS coordinator, county coordinator roles. So if there are folks who are new to the role or still trying to get comfortable figuring out what's going to happen, and I feel bad for you if you just got on this role and then figured out your funding was going to get cut potentially, but just know that there's a lot of us doing this, and we do network quite often, and definitely try to use Doug and Rafa to try to coordinate things if you have ideas, if you want to, if you're trying to put together a partnership and don't know where to start. A lot of us have hopefully some good insight on how to do those things. And we've done lots of pilot projects and trying to figure out what components of our program are working efficiently and what aren't, and how to save money here and there. So we do communicate a lot. I hope that more folks kind of I don't know how to extend more of kind of an invite for people to just get in touch with us. And these workshops are perfect opportunity to do that. So try not to be timid. I know a lot of us are just very excited to talk about AIS in any kind of way. So feel free to reach out to us, and again, use Rafa and Doug as kind of a nexus to get to us. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. And just to continue on a plugin for that. So this year, Doug and I also, he mentioned about the in-person workshops that we're planning next month. You should have gotten the email before this meeting. And this year, we have pretty intentionally tried to get as many of our team members from the DNR to be present. That way, we're there for you. You can ask questions, you can connect. So everything that Drew just mentioned, yeah, that's also our goal. We want to be there for you. We want to support you. So if you can attend those workshops, especially this year, so we can prepare for next year, that will be really helpful for everybody. I know Macer's also going to be there. Megan and Maddie are going to be presenting. Also, Nick, anybody from Macer's welcome to come as well, because the more people we have at the table, the better we can plan.
Absolutely, totally agree. Yeah, that's what Rafa and I are here for. So please tap us if you have any ideas. We can put something together. We can put together a workshop. We can do a variety of different things, but at least we can get a discussion going if we have a new idea that seems to would rally our forces around aquatic invasive species prevention. So I see we just have a couple minutes left. I've got some wrap-up comments, but do we have any other comments from our panelists or from the floor?
Only to please take a couple minutes to fill out our survey. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sure Doug was going to mention it anyway, but figured I'd throw that in there.
Took one of my comments away. Yes, very much so.
Yeah, Spencer here. Take the survey. We cannot understate or overstate how important it is to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did put quite a bit of effort into the survey as well. So, I mean, we did, like was mentioned, we started this in December. And here we are in March. We thought that we'd be able to do it within just a few weeks, but knowing how surveys come together, I said, well, maybe not quite so fast, folks. All right. Well, I know there's a lot of comments and questions that are in the chat that didn't get answered. Apologies for that, but we've run out of time. But if you do have a question for any of our panelists, feel free to reach out to them directly or send us your questions, and maybe we can compile them and send them out to the panel. And we go either way on that. So want to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists. Kelly, thanks for joining us and offering your perspectives, and Nick and Steve and Drew, really appreciate all the comments that you provided in your presentations and otherwise. So thank you all for coming. Let me move my screen here so I can.
Doug, how about a quick shout out for UMISC?
Oh yes, and don't forget UMISC as well. Mark your calendars, October 6th through the 8th, lacrosse.
And tomorrow's workshop.
Abstracts close April
17th, April 15th. And registration will be open in mid-May. And I'll also like to say that we have some fabulous field trips that are going to happen on Tuesday afternoon. Right now we have 11 field trips for you to choose from. Yeah, it's going to be incredible.
Oh, Doug, one more. You mentioned at our task force meeting, but the Aquatic Invaders 3 Summit, you're going to have a leadership role in that too. That's coming up next March as well.
Yep. Jeff Forrester has asked me to serve on the advisory committee for the development of the summit, so I'm happy to serve in that capacity. So
these the survey results will also be at that event too. So please, pretty please, take the survey.
Yep. So, well, I think, as we've learned, aquatic invasive species is one of the most pressing issues here in Minnesota, and the intent of this workshop has been to highlight the successes that we're having in Minnesota to prevent and slow the spread of aquatic invasive species. I hope we can take a little bit of pride in giving ourselves a little bit of pat on the back when we acknowledge that we're the only state in the nation that has a statewide program, and that's because of all of you. And so congratulations to all of you. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing statewide. We can also brag a little bit about, the investment in the AIS management over the past 30 years, but in particular over the last 10 years with the local AIS Prevention Aid. It's been a very wise investment, as we've heard today. I suggest, as we've talked about already earlier, that it should be our quest to get this word out about our story and celebrate it in any ways that we possibly can. And while we may not be able to directly advocate on the issue, as I mentioned earlier, we can educate folks, including our legislators, our county leaders, commissioners, and so on, to help get this message out to gather support for that. Again, we can't do the advocating. Some groups can, like the Minnesota Lakes and Rivers Advocates, who was unable to join us today, Wildlife Forever, the statewide advisory committee, the Minnesota Invasive Species Advisory Council, and also AMC, or the Association of Minnesota Counties, all voiced their support last year in at least getting delayed the funding to 2027. So that was definitely taken to heart by the legislature and definitely made a difference. So do what you can to help support the effort. In the best of all worlds, it would be great if we could get a coordination all across the state, as we've been talking about here. I think that's going to be one of the things that's going to be the outcome of this, one way or another. Thank you all for attending. Special thanks to Rafa for coordinating today and other DNR staff who supported us today. Any final thoughts or questions, Rafa?
Yeah, just hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at our last workshop. Usually we have them different weeks, but that's just how it worked out this week. So hopefully we'll see you there. Same time.
See you all tomorrow, 1 to 4 again. And yeah, fill out that survey, will you?
Thanks, Doug. Rafa.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so
Have a great
much.
afternoon, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.